He rose from a small-town upbringing to the most powerful office in the world, but one scandal erased it all. The story of Richard Nixon is a gripping lesson in ambition, power, and the price of lost trust. From humble beginnings to the White House. Richard Nixon was not born into wealth or political royalty. He entered the world in 1913 in a small house in Yorba Linda, California, raised in a modest Quaker family that valued hard work, discipline, and faith. His father ran a small grocery store and gas station, and money was often tight. Tragedy struck early. Two of his brothers died from illness, shaping his serious and driven personality. Despite financial struggles, Nixon excelled in school. He earned scholarships to attend Whittier College and later Duke University School of Law, proving that determination could overcome limited resources. He built his reputation as a sharp debater and relentless campaigner. His political rise began after serving in the U.S. Navy during World War II. In 1946, he won a seat in Congress. Just 4 years later, he became a U.S. Senator. By 1952, he was selected as Vice President under Dwight Eisenhower, gaining national recognition. After narrowly losing the 1960 presidential election to John F. Kennedy, many believed his career was over, but Nixon refused to quit. He rebuilt his image, campaigned tirelessly, and in 1968, he achieved what once seemed uncertain. He was elected President of the United States. His journey from a small-town upbringing to the highest office in the nation became a powerful example of ambition, resilience, and relentless determination. The road to the presidency. The road to the presidency. For Richard Nixon, the path to the White House was anything but smooth. After serving as vice president under Dwight Eisenhower for 8 years, Nixon seemed like the natural next leader of his party. But in 1960, he narrowly lost the presidential election to John F. Kennedy in one of the closest and most debated races in American history. The defeat was painful. Television debates exposed his weaknesses, and critics believed his political career was finished. 2 years later, he lost the California governor's race and told reporters they wouldn't have him to kick around anymore. Many assumed he was done. But Nixon was not ready to disappear. He studied his mistakes, rebuilt his strategy, and patiently waited for the right political moment. By 1968, America was divided by the Vietnam War, civil unrest, and rising crime. Nixon presented himself as the candidate of law and order and promised stability in chaotic times. His message resonated with millions of voters. That year, he won the presidency, proving that political comebacks are possible for those who refuse to surrender. Cold War leadership and global strategy. Cold War leadership and global strategy. When Richard Nixon entered the White House in 1969, the Cold War dominated global politics. The United States and the Soviet Union stood locked in a tense nuclear rivalry, and the Vietnam War was draining American resources and morale. Nixon knew that military power alone would not secure victory. Strategy and diplomacy would be essential. Working closely with his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, Nixon introduced a bold approach known as détente, an effort to ease tensions with communist powers rather than escalate them. In 1972, he made a historic visit to China, reopening diplomatic relations after decades of hostility. The move shocked the world and reshaped global alliances. That same year, Nixon traveled to Soviet Union and signed the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT I, a landmark agreement to limit nuclear weapons. His strategy was clear: balance power through negotiation, not just confrontation. Opening relations with China. One of the boldest moves of Richard Nixon's presidency was opening relations with China after more than 20 years of hostility. Since 1949, the United States had refused to officially recognize Communist China, and tensions between the two nations were frozen in Cold War rivalry. Nixon believed the global balance of power needed a dramatic shift. Working behind the scenes with his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, secret diplomatic talks began. In 1971, Kissinger made a quiet trip to Beijing to prepare the groundwork. Then, in 1972, Nixon made history by visiting China himself, the first sitting U.S. president to do so. The world watched as he met Chairman Mao. This breakthrough weakened Soviet influence, opened doors for trade and diplomacy, and changed the course of the Cold War. It proved that bold diplomacy can sometimes achieve what years of conflict cannot. Vietnam War and foreign policy challenges. When Nixon took office in 1969, the Vietnam War was already tearing America apart. More than 500,000 U.S. troops were deployed, casualties were rising, and public protests were growing louder across college campuses in major cities. The war had become not just a military conflict, but a political and moral crisis.
Nixon faced a brutal dilemma. Withdrawing too quickly could make the United States appear weak in the Cold War, but continuing the war risked deeper division at home. His solution was a strategy called Vietnamization. The plan aimed to gradually withdraw American troops while strengthening South Vietnam's military so it could defend itself. At the same time, Nixon expanded the conflict by authorizing secret bombings in Cambodia and later operations in Laos. His administration argued these moves were necessary to disrupt North Vietnamese supply lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. However, when news of the bombings became public, it ignited nationwide outrage and intensified anti-war protests. Meanwhile, Nixon pursued diplomacy alongside military pressure. With the help of Henry Kissinger, secret negotiations began with North Vietnam. After years of fighting and political turmoil, the Paris Peace Accords were signed in 1973, allowing for the withdrawal of U.S. troops. Yet, the outcome was bittersweet. Although American forces left Vietnam, the conflict between North and South Vietnam continued. In 1975, Saigon fell, and the war ended with a communist victory, raising difficult questions about the sacrifices made. Nixon's handling of Vietnam revealed the complexity of foreign policy during the Cold War. Leadership required balancing military strength, global credibility, public opinion, and political survival. The war became one of the defining challenges of his presidency, shaping both his authority abroad and the growing distrust at home. The landslide re-election victory. By 1972, Nixon had positioned himself as a leader of strength, strategy, and stability. Despite the ongoing Vietnam War and domestic unrest earlier in his term, he entered the election year with powerful political advantages, improving relations with China, arms control talks with the Soviet Union, and a gradual reduction of American troops in Vietnam. His campaign focused on law and order, economic stability, and foreign policy success. Nixon portrayed himself as the steady hand guiding America through turbulent times. Meanwhile, his opponent, George McGovern, was seen by many voters as too liberal for a nation still anxious about war, crime, and social change. The result was one of the most overwhelming victories in U.S. history. Nixon won 49 out of 50 states, securing over 60% of the popular vote and dominating the Electoral College. It wasn't just a win, it was a political landslide that seemed to confirm his authority and public support. Yet, beneath the surface of this historic triumph, cracks were forming. Even as Americans delivered him a massive mandate, the Watergate investigation was quietly gaining momentum. His greatest electoral victory would soon stand in stark contrast to the scandal that followed. The 1972 landslide showed the height of Nixon's political power, but it also marked the peak before a dramatic fall. The Watergate break-in. On June 17, 1972, just months before the presidential election, 5 men were arrested inside the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. At first, it seemed like a minor burglary, but it would become the spark that ignited one of the greatest political scandals in American history. The men were caught installing listening devices and photographing confidential documents. What appeared to be a simple break-in quickly revealed deeper connections. Investigators discovered that the burglars had ties to the Committee to Re-elect the President, often mockingly called CREEP, the campaign organization working to secure another term for Richard Nixon. Here is where coincidence played a powerful role. The break-in might not have gone unnoticed if not for a vigilant security guard who spotted tape placed over door latches and called the police. That small observation led to arrests, and the arrests led to a chain reaction of investigations. As journalists at the Washington Post began digging deeper, especially reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, hidden connections started to surface. Secret campaign funds, hush money payments, and attempts to obstruct justice slowly came into focus. What began as a burglary evolved into evidence of a cover-up reaching the highest levels of government. The true turning point came when it was revealed that conversations in the Oval Office had been secretly recorded. Those tapes would eventually expose efforts to block the FBI investigation. The issue was no longer just a break-in, it was abuse of power and obstruction of justice. The Watergate break-in was both a crime and a catalyst. A single night, a piece of tape on a door, and one security guard's suspicion unraveled a presidency. It proved that sometimes history changes not only because of grand strategies, but because of small, unexpected moments that expose the truth. The cover-up that changed history. The real damage of Watergate was not just the break-in, it was the cover-up. What could have remained a political embarrassment turned into a constitutional crisis because of the decisions made afterward. Soon after the arrests at the Watergate complex, efforts began to contain the fallout. Members of the administration worked to block the FBI investigation, raise hush money for the burglars, and limit what information reached the public. The goal was simple: protect the presidency of Richard Nixon at all costs. As investigations intensified, journalists from the Washington Post continued uncovering links between the burglars and high-level officials. Senate hearings were launched, and the nation watched televised testimonies that revealed a web of secrecy, pressure, and political manipulation. The turning point came when it was disclosed that Nixon had secretly recorded conversations in the Oval Office. These tapes became the key evidence. When the Supreme Court ordered their release, the recordings exposed conversations showing attempts to obstruct justice. The smoking gun tape proved that the cover-up had reached the very top. Public trust collapsed. Members of Congress from both parties began to support impeachment. Facing almost certain removal from office, Nixon made an unprecedented decision. He resigned in August 1974. The cover-up changed history because it reshaped how Americans viewed power. It strengthened oversight of government actions, reinforced the principle that no president is above the law, and left a lasting lesson. Corruption is damaging, but the attempt to hide it can be even more destructive. Loss of public trust. The Watergate scandal didn't just end with the burglary and the cover-up, it destroyed the American public's trust in Richard Nixon and the presidency itself. Once a leader celebrated for his political skill and international diplomacy, Nixon's reputation collapsed almost overnight. Reasons for the loss of trust. Obstruction of justice. Attempting to block FBI investigations made it clear that Nixon was willing to abuse power to protect himself. Deception of the public. Repeatedly denying involvement in Watergate while evidence mounted showed dishonesty at the highest level. Abuse of presidential power. Using government agencies and secret funds to silence opponents violated democratic norms. The Oval Office tapes. The release of recorded conversations proved that the cover-up was orchestrated by the president himself. Aftermath. As a result of this loss of trust, Nixon faced intense political pressure. Congress began impeachment proceedings, and bipartisan support for his removal grew. Facing inevitable impeachment and the near certainty of conviction, Nixon resigned on August 8, 1974, the first and only U.S. president to do so.
He left behind a divided nation, a tarnished legacy, and a presidency forever marked by scandal. This episode showed that public confidence is fragile, and power without accountability can vanish almost instantly. The first U.S. president to resign. The first U.S. president to resign, Richard Nixon's resignation on August 8, 1974, marked an unprecedented moment in American history. Never before had a sitting U.S. president stepped down voluntarily. For decades, the presidency had been associated with power, prestige, and continuity, but Nixon's fall showed that even the highest office is accountable to the law and the people. The resignation came after months of mounting evidence from the Watergate scandal, including the infamous Oval Office tapes, which exposed his role in the cover-up. Congress had begun impeachment proceedings, and bipartisan support for his removal grew. Facing inevitable impeachment and the near certainty of conviction, Nixon resigned on August 8, 1974, the first and only U.S. president to do so. He left behind a divided nation, a tarnished legacy, and a presidency forever marked by scandal. This episode showed that public confidence is fragile, and power without accountability can vanish almost instantly. Fall from power and political isolation. After resigning in August 1974, Nixon entered a period of profound personal and political isolation. Once one of the most powerful figures in the world, he was suddenly cut off from influence and credibility. Allies and former supporters distanced themselves, and the media relentlessly chronicled his mistakes. Nixon faced public humiliation, his reputation permanently tarnished by Watergate. Even though he retained some loyal followers, most Americans now viewed him with suspicion, and he had little political leverage. Invitations to speak or advise were limited, and he became a symbol of the consequences of political misconduct. The post-presidency years were marked by reflection and writing. Nixon focused on publishing memoirs and offering commentary on foreign policy, attempting to rehabilitate his image in areas like China and the Soviet Union. Yet, despite these efforts, he remained largely isolated from mainstream political life. His fall from power demonstrated how quickly influence can vanish when trust is broken. From commanding the world stage to living in political solitude, Nixon's story remains a stark reminder of the fragility of power without integrity.
The lesson: why integrity matters more than authority. Richard Nixon's career is a striking example that authority alone cannot sustain leadership. Integrity is what gives power its legitimacy. Nixon achieved extraordinary successes. He became president, opened diplomatic relations with China, and pursued arms control with the Soviet Union. Yet all of these accomplishments were overshadowed by the Watergate scandal. The lesson is clear: no matter how high one rises, dishonesty, cover-ups, and abuse of power erode trust. Authority without integrity is fragile. Public confidence, once lost, is almost impossible to regain. Nixon's resignation showed that even the presidency, arguably the most powerful office in the world, is not immune to accountability. Ultimately, his story teaches leaders that credibility and moral responsibility are more enduring than titles, achievements, or short-term political victories. Success without ethical grounding can collapse swiftly, leaving a legacy remembered more for scandal than for accomplishment. Legacy: success, scandal, and historical judgment. Richard Nixon leaves a complex and contradictory legacy. On one hand, he achieved remarkable milestones, pioneering détente with the Soviet Union, opening relations with China, and implementing policies that shaped domestic and foreign affairs. These accomplishments highlight his strategic thinking, political skill, and vision on the global stage. On the other hand, the Watergate scandal and subsequent cover-up permanently stained his reputation. His presidency became a cautionary tale of how ambition, when coupled with dishonesty, can destroy public trust and overshadow even the greatest achievements. Historians often view Nixon as a paradox,
a president capable of historic diplomacy and yet marred by ethical failure. His story underscores the idea that true leadership is measured not just by results, but by the integrity with which those results are achieved. Ultimately, Nixon's legacy serves as both a testament to political brilliance and a warning. Success may win elections, but integrity defines how history remembers